Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. I'm Van Galta, and today we're going to be taking an extensive deep dive into the popular upstart fantasy series, the Wingfeather Saga. So I'm going to preface this by saying that this review is actually a little late since the Wingfeather Saga first started coming out in 2008. But it was really popular in my church and homeschool co-op, so there must be something about it that's that good, right? I grew up around online for such a long time, and I could not find an honest review on the book series. You don't have a review on the writing quality, or the plotting, or the character development that was in the story, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. The whole review is going to be a 4-part series, one video discussing each book. So stay tuned to episode 4 if you want to hear my thoughts on the series in general. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, this is my completely honest review of the Wingfeather Saga. Now, do be cautioned, there are spoilers in this review. If you want to avoid most spoilers, click the timestamp in the description down below. Alrighty. Goodness. First of all, I will disclose a brief summary of the plot and cite my biggest problem with the series thus far. Our story starts with Janner, Tink, and Lily Igby, 12, 11, and 10 respectively, living in a sleepy settlement just outside the dark sea of darkness with their mother and grandfather, Nia and Poda. They are oppressed by the evil reptilian fangs of Dang, who are the soldiers of Nag the Nameless, and enjoy terrorizing the townsfolk. Most of the book is a series of unfortunate accidents that happens to the Igbys, mostly tangles with them and the local fangs. It soon becomes apparent, however, that many people are keeping secrets from the children, especially about the Igbys' father. Eventually, however, the Fangs get wind that Nia has the fabled jewels of Aniera, which are written to be instrumental in Nag's collapse. Aniera is a fabled fallen kingdom and is legendary in the eyes of the children. The malicious Fangs burn the Igbys' house to the ground and pursue them deep within the forest. Previously in the story, the children had been saved by a crazy nutjob named Pete the Sockman, probably the best dynamic in the story, in my opinion. And he returns again to help Podo, who is then revealed to be an ex-pirate, which is kind of weird, battle off the Fangs. They successfully escape the Fangs and hide in Pete's treehouse. Then it's confrontation time. The Igbys are actually the so-called Wingfeathers, the original rulers of Aniera. Esben Wingfeather, Nia's husband and father of the Igby children, is revealed to be the king. Pete's real name was Arthur Wingfeather, and he was throne warden to his brother Esben. And as the biggest bombshell of all, the jewels of Aniera are actually the children themselves. The story ends with the family hiding in the forest from the Fangs, from which presumably they're well hidden. Okay, all right. So I'm going to say that this book is definitely the worst of the series, having read all 4, so prepare for a scathing review. I had several problems with the story. First of all, before I even read the first book, I've heard that people were saying that the series was, quote-unquote, better than Tolkien. What? What? Better than Tolkien?
Have you lost your mind?
Yeah, now that is a problem in and of itself. I'm not sure it's a problem of the series, but if it inspires these thoughts in other people, then no. And you are comparing apples to oranges here, as the two can't even be compared because of the difference in the genres. While this wasn't exactly a problem, I was kind of disappointed to discover that I wasn't reading a tale of swashbuckling adventures, daring raids, and challenges issued against horrible monsters. That was just kind of a pain point for me because I thought I was getting something like way more high fantasy than this kind of low fantasy, more akin to Wizard of Oz. But I can tell you, it does get better throughout the series. Like, slight spoiler there, it does get better. Okay, on to the first real problem with the narrative, the foreshadowing. In my opinion, this was the only thing that was really poorly done, and if made better, the story's quality would be greatly improved. There were a bunch of reveals at the end of the book, but only one of them really excited me, and that was the fact that the children themselves were the jewels of Aniera. Every other revealing of character was just, seriously meh. It would be great if we got better foreshadowing in the beginning to hint at these huge reveals, but no, that was painfully absent. For example, instead of gradually revealing who Janner, Tink, and Lily's father is, Peterson kinda accidentally spills his name to the kids early on. It seemed wooden and undercooked. I would have liked it far better if Janner, who is the main protagonist, would have figured out himself, but was missing one clue, and he turns to his mom to figure it out. But instead, every single hint only reinforced one fact. Your father's named Esben, and we don't talk about him. All the information we know about the Igbys' past throughout the bulk of the story is spilled within the first 10 minutes. That's bad foreshadowing. Even worse, Pete the Sockman's story was the best dynamic, but he remained in the dark for far too long. Yes, I get that he's a bit wacko, but he's also Arthur Wingfeather, throne warden of Aniera. Just because he has such an epic name is an excuse to reveal more about him. But for 3/4 of the story, the best we got was a not-so-subtle Wingeby Ingfeather and a journal, which never made sense until the end of the story. Pete was just not interesting until later, and then when he was interesting, They didn't explain anything. Yeah, like how he has talons instead of hands. You think that ought to be explained? To solve this problem with the story, book one just has too much information that is saved for the end and too little to give at the beginning to keep the reader hooked. My next big problem with this book in particular is Peterson's hero syndrome. No offense, again, but I think I'll be using that as a term in the future. For most of the story, there wasn't a proper appearance of a hero. I just found myself putting down the book and saying, wow, this story is in real need of an Aragorn. The element of heroism was sadly missing for most of the story, which is really important in high fantasy, epic fantasy, or heroic fantasy. You do need someone who can be the hero. I'm sorry, but Poto the retired pirate who has problems digging up thwaps out of his garden is not going to cut it as a hero. Neither is Goofy Pete the Sock Man. I was really hoping that one of them would rise to the occasion and be the hero, but none of them really had that heroism we could connect with. They both had this huge flaw that prevented them from being the hero, and just how they sprung into hero status is kind of this lame and unprecedented. So yes, definitely a lacking of heroism was a big problem in the first book. You do need someone who can be the hero. Another thing that I should touch on was that the conflict. It was very mundane for most of the story. I'm surprised that Peterson tried to make this epic fantasy series, and one of his big problems in the first book was, oh no, we're going into the haunted house. This is scary. Yeah, that was kind of lame if I do say so myself. This is an epic fantasy. You're supposed to be following in the footsteps of Tolkien. And the way you cook up your conflicts is just so mundane. It's just so lame. There's hardly any depth to it. My third and final big objective problem with the first book was Peterson's world building. While I'm sure he would have done a fine job doing it through dialogue, the encyclopedia way of world building has not aged well. It feels like a very superficial way to tell a story with a good bit of lore, but there's ways of condensing it into the story that Peterson didn't even try. Some people like the short histories at the beginning of the book. I all but skipped them. Regardless, there are better ways to do storytelling. The world he built was fine, but he built it poorly, hence the bad world building. Then I have a bunch of small complaints that were more subjective and don't matter nearly as much. Peterson's names seemed very uncreative and annoying, such as the Fangs of Dang, Nag the Nameless. So overall, his naming was actually kind of childish, which I mean isn't bad because this seemed like it was meant to be a kid's novel, but considering how it evolves into a much darker and mature theme later on, it doesn't really make sense that this book would just be so lighthearted and mundane. All right, yes, the crude humor. The crude humor was not funny. Maybe that's just because I'm no longer 12, but it felt much more forced than, say, Cressida Cowell's How to Train Your Dragon. The reoccurring rash joke felt like it belonged in some darker novel, and the general diet of fangs shall go unsaid. All in all, my rating for this book is 6 out of 10. It could be worse. I'm sorry, but the book is just a mock with things that just could have been better. If I would have read this book when I was younger, I probably would not have read the rest of the series because it was just kind of boring. I felt like this was a book that suddenly remembered it was supposed to follow in the footsteps of Lord of the Rings and became an epic fantasy. However, I was expecting this. A friend informed me that the first book would be worse than others, and it gets better as you move on, which is true. It does get better as you move on, so stay tuned if you want to see how much better the Wingfeather Saga gets. Be sure to check out my fantasy book series, Praetors of Lost Magic. The sequel to the first book, The Mage's Gambit, is coming out soon, so stay tuned for that. Be sure to like and subscribe so that you never miss a single video. Good luck, happy writing, and I'll see you next time.